I've never been one to believe in ghost stories, but that night, driving alone on a time-forgotten road, something within me changed forever. I was on my way to a small town in the countryside. My GPS had failed me, and instead of turning back to the main highway, I decided to take a shortcut that seemed to lead directly to my destination. The path was narrow, surrounded by trees that seemed to reach the sky, blocking almost all the moonlight. A thick fog floated across the asphalt, as if alive, swallowing the beams of my car's headlights. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves blown by the wind. As I drove, an uncomfortable sensation began to grow. It felt as if something was watching me, hidden among the shadows of the trees. I turned up the volume on the radio, hoping to shake off the uneasiness, but suddenly static overtook the frequency. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 11:45 p.m. There was still over an hour left to my journey, but something about that road made time feel slower, as if trapped in a limbo. Then I noticed something strange, an old, rusted, tilted road sign. In almost unreadable letters, it said, "Beware. Turning back is safer." I dismissed the warning, thinking it was just a local prank or some teenager's vandalism. But as I drove further, the road became narrower. The trees seemed to close in around the car, and the fog thickened to the point where I could barely see a meter ahead. As I continued, the tension in the air seemed to grow. Suddenly, I noticed something unusual in the rearview mirror. The taillights reflected vaguely human figures among the trees. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. My heart began to race. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Then, something crossed the road in front of me. It was too fast to make out, but it looked like a shadow, a human-shaped figure. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded on the damp asphalt. My heart pounded as the silence of the night returned, heavier than before. I stepped out of the car to check if I had hit an animal or something. There was nothing there, just the darkness and the cold wind rustling through the trees. But when I returned to the car, I noticed something that hadn't been there before, small handprints on the foggy windows. I quickly got back inside, locking all the doors. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. I started the engine and sped up, determined to leave that road as fast as possible. As I drove, something even more disturbing began to dawn on me. The road seemed to repeat itself. I passed the same rusted sign with the warning, the same fallen tree trunk by the roadside, the same winding curves. It was as if I were trapped in a loop, driving in endless circles. Panic began to creep in. In the distance, I finally saw lights. A gas station, standing alone in the middle of nowhere. It looked abandoned, but the faintly flickering sign offered a glimmer of hope. I pulled in, got out of the car, and walked toward the entrance. As I pushed the door open, a bell chimed, but the place was empty. Dust-covered shelves lined the walls, and the air reeked of old gasoline. On the counter was an open newspaper with a headline that made my blood run cold: "Fatal accident on endless road, driver never found." The photos showed a car identical to mine, wrecked in a ditch. The date? The same night I was there. Panic consumed me, and I ran back to my car. But when I tried to start it, the engine sputtered and died. Silence enveloped everything once again. As the engine failed repeatedly, the silence grew deafening. That's when I heard footsteps. They didn't come from one direction but seemed to surround me, closing in. I looked outside but saw no one. Just the darkness, now denser and more oppressive. Suddenly, the passenger door swung open by itself, and the air turned ice cold. A figure entered the car. I couldn't see it clearly, it was like a living shadow, dense yet fluid, and the sensation of being watched became unbearable. My breath hitched, and a scream caught in my throat. "You should never have come down this road," a deep, distant voice whispered, as if echoing inside my mind. The figure reached toward the steering wheel. Without thinking, I pressed the ignition button again, and, miraculously, the engine roared to life. The figure vanished instantly, as if dissolving into the exhaust smoke. Without hesitation, I floored the accelerator, driving as if my life depended on it, and perhaps it did. Finally, the road began to change. I saw the lights of a town in the distance, and the endless loop was broken. My heart pounded as I reached the safety of civilization. I pulled into a parking lot, trying to calm myself, but when I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw something that froze my blood once more. On the backseat window was a message written in trembling, wet letters: "Never leave the road at night." Since that night, I've never driven through isolated places after dark. The road may be behind me, but what I experienced there will never leave my mind. What was that presence? Why did it choose me? I'll never know. But in the silence of the night, I still feel as though I'm being watched. If you enjoyed this story and want more dark and chilling tales, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories. And let me know in the comments, have you ever experienced something unexplainable while driving at night?